I used to stare at the ceiling late at night, wondering when I'd stop dreaming. The glow from my phone barely lit the room as my husband snored softly beside me. We weren't fighting, we weren't cold. We were simply nothing. The days bled into one another. Coffee, work, dinner, small talk, silent. I was 34 and felt 74. I hadn't cried in a year. Not because I was happy, but because I didn't have the energy to feel anything that deeply anymore. I had once been a firecracker. Ambitious, curious, bold enough to walk into any room and ask questions no one else dared to. Somewhere between marriage, spreadsheets, and the 9-to-5 grind, that version of me had been smothered under responsibilities, expectations, and routine. One evening, during a painfully quiet dinner, I looked across the table and just said it. I think I could do better. He looked up slowly, put his fork down, and blinked. No anger. No sadness. Just silence. Then do it. That's all he said. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't ask who I meant. I had expected tears or an argument. Instead, he called my bluff. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't threatening him to get attention. I wanted out, not just of the marriage, but of the life we'd built that didn't feel like mine. I left 3 days later. No one clapped. No one congratulated me. There was no Eat, Pray, Love soundtrack in the background. Just me, a couple of suitcases, and a one-bedroom rental in a part of town where nobody knew my name. I didn't have a grand plan. I wasn't some genius entrepreneur sitting on $1 million idea. I had $11,370 in my checking account, a decade of corporate marketing experience, and something I hadn't felt in years: hunger. For the first week, I cried between job applications. I ate ramen and questioned whether I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Every morning I reminded myself, you asked for this. You said you wanted better. So now what? On day 9 of my new life, something weird happened. I was walking through a thrift store, trying to find a cheap but decent chair for my makeshift workspace. I spotted a woman crying over an ugly floral couch. Curious and nosy, I asked if she was okay. She laughed through tears and said, I just got promoted today, and I wanted to celebrate by finally replacing the couch I've had since college. But I can't even afford this one. She was smiling, but I could see it. The defeat. The exhaustion. I saw myself in her. I sat with her for 20 minutes. We didn't know each other's names, but by the time she left, she hugged me and whispered, You should be a coach or something. You're good at this. That sentence haunted me. I started researching. Life coaching. Career coaching. Confidence coaching. I wasn't sold yet. It all seemed vague and saturated, but then I read something that stuck with me. People pay for clarity. Not because they're weak, but because everyone needs someone who listens without judgment. That night, I opened a blank Google Doc and wrote one question at the top. If I were to start from scratch, what would I build? The answer wasn't a business. The answer was a life where I never again needed someone's permission to chase what I knew I was capable of. So I made a promise to myself. I would spend the next 90 days exploring everything I was curious about, no shame, no rules. I called it my Clarity Quarter. I wrote every morning and tracked my moods. I volunteered at a community center. I took free online psychology classes. I even signed up for an improv course. And with each new experience, I started to see patterns in myself. I thrived when I was helping people tell their stories. My corporate career had always revolved around messaging, branding, communication, but now I saw it differently. I didn't want to sell products. I wanted to reignite people's self-belief. By day 68, I had my first coaching framework. Nothing fancy. No website. Just me, a Google Calendar, and a single client, a recent college grad trying to figure out how to land her dream job without drowning in self-doubt. She paid me $50 for an hour. When I saw the payment notification pop up on my screen, I cried. Not because of the money, but because I realized I could do this. It wasn't smooth sailing from there. The doubts came in waves. You're not qualified. Who do you think you are? There are 1,000 other coaches out there already. But every time I helped someone land a job or speak up in a meeting or leave a toxic relationship, a voice in my head whispered back, "You're not them. You're you." And that's enough. I created a podcast next, using a $20 microphone and blankets on my walls for soundproofing. I called it Better Than Before. Each episode was 10 minutes long. No fluff. Just straight talk about confidence, self-worth, decision-making, and the psychology of change. At first, I had 6 listeners. 2 of them were my cousins. But I didn't care. I had something to say, and that was new for me. By month 6, I had a $2,000 month from coaching and a part-time job writing blog content for a mental health app. Still not millionaire status, but for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. One night, while cleaning my tiny kitchen, I got a text from my ex-husband. "Just listen to your podcast. I get it now. Proud of you." I didn't respond. I just stared at that message, heart thumping, as the realization hit me. I wasn't waiting for someone better to come along anymore. I was becoming the better I had once demanded. That's when everything changed. From that moment on, I stopped doubting whether I could succeed. I decided I would succeed. And I started acting like the woman I wanted to become, not the woman I had been. And this was only the beginning. They say clarity arrives in whispers before it ever roars. The more I leaned into my instincts, the louder those whispers became. A year before, I wouldn't have believed any of this. I was still comparing throw pillow fabrics at IKEA and pretending that was fulfillment. Now, I was choosing fonts for my brand, negotiating rates for speaking gigs, and creating content that had strangers messaging me, thanking me for helping them reclaim pieces of themselves. But success didn't land like lightning. It grew in stubborn, relentless increment. It started with a single DM from a woman named Mia. She had just turned 39, was stuck in a marketing job she hated, and said she felt like a ghost in business casual. I smiled when I read that, because I knew exactly what she meant. We set up a free session. I walked her through my clarity process, the same one I had used to build myself back up, unlearn, reframe, reclaim. That single call changed us both. She landed a new job within a month and doubled her salary. More importantly, she said she finally spoke during meetings without her throat closing up. That's when she wrote me a testimonial I'll never forget. She didn't just help me find a new job. She helped me find my voice. I put that quote on the top of my website, and then I finally launched it. I named my business Forge. Simple, strong, transformative, like a blade tempered by fire. Everything I built after that was forged from the friction of my old life and the flame of the one I was creating. No borrowed slogans, no coaching jargon, just truth, tools, and tenacity. My services were clear. One-on-one clarity coaching, story-based career mapping, confidence architecture. I used no paid ads, no PR. Just word of mouth, podcast guests, and a consistent, raw presence on social media. I made a promise to myself early on. No filters, no pretending. People don't need perfection. They need permission. By the 9th month, I had 4 full-time clients and a waitlist. But still, something felt contained. As though I was building inside a box, and the box was shrinking. Then I got invited to speak at a small women's entrepreneurship event in Austin. It wasn't glamorous, 40 people, folding chairs, fluorescent lights. But as I stood on that stage with my palms sweating, something clicked. I wasn't meant to work with people. I was meant to ignite them. After that event, my inbox exploded. I booked 6 more speaking engagements. Then came the emails asking if I had a course, a community, a curriculum. I had none of those, yet. But I also didn't panic. I knew I'd earned the interest by showing up consistently, vulnerably, and with conviction. All I had to do now was deliver. I spent the next 3 months building the Forge Academy, a 6-week immersive program that combined neuroscience, identity deconstruction, storytelling, and emotional resilience. It was unapologetically intense and zero fluff. I priced it at $800 for the first cohort. 43 people signed up. The revenue? $34,400. The impact? Immeasurable. We had corporate leaders, single moms, first-gen college grads, recent retirees, and burned-out creatives. Every week, we cried, we laughed, we questioned everything we thought we knew about success. And I realized something big. I wasn't just building a business. I was architecting a movement. Still, I wasn't satisfied. I kept studying. I dissected the strategies of the greats. I read everything about Sarah Blakely, how she turned $5,000 into a global brand because she believed in an idea no one else did. I studied Mark Lohr's obsession with customer obsession, how he built Jet.com to compete with Amazon by focusing on experience, not just pricing. But the billionaire who cracked me open was Melanie Perkins, co-founder of Canva. She was turned down by over 100 investors before she found someone who believed in her vision. Her story taught me that the world doesn't reward the best ideas. It rewards the most determined people. I wrote one sentence in my journal that night: "Your relentlessness must outweigh their resistance." And that became my next chapter. I hired a part-time assistant. Her name was Noor, and she was a force of nature. She organized my back-end systems, automated my calendar, and helped me scale the academy from 43 students to 200 in just 6 months. I raised the price to $1,500. I created tiered tracks for executive clients. We broke 6 figures in revenue that quarter. I celebrated by buying a new laptop. I still drove my used Honda. People started referring to me as the voice doctor, the confidence whisperer, the woman who breaks you just to build you stronger. I laughed at the nicknames, but secretly, I was proud. It meant I was no longer forgettable. I was no longer invisible. And then I got the email. It was from a venture capital firm in New York. They had been following my podcast, and one of their partners had gone through my academy anonymously. She said it was more effective than 6 months of executive coaching at McKinsey. She wanted to fund the next level. At first, I was cautious. I had bootstrapped everything. I owned 100% of my company. But the offer was different. It wasn't about replacing me. It was about amplifying me. So I flew to Manhattan, sat across from a table of sharp-dressed investors. And I did something I never thought I'd do. I pitched. Not for money. For vision. I told them Forge wasn't just a coaching platform. It was an identity accelerator. I wanted to license the framework to universities, integrate it into corporate DI programs, translate it for women in emerging economies. I told them I wasn't building a course. I was building a language of self-worth. They offered $2.5 million for 10% equity. I took a walk before saying yes. Not because I doubted the deal, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to choose power instead of chasing it. I called my ex-husband later that night, not out of sentiment, but because I wanted to tell him something. "You were right to call my bluff," I said. He paused. "I'm glad you found what you were looking for." "I didn't find it," I replied. "I built it." And that's when I knew the awakening wasn't a moment. It was a series of relentless choices every day to stay awake, to no longer sleepwalk through my life, to no longer live inside someone else's blueprint. I had become the better I once fantasized about, not through luck, not through marriage, not through saving, but through fire. And what's forged in fire? Steel. People think that once you get the investment, the press, the growth, it gets easier. No one warns you that success is its own kind of fire. After I signed the deal with the VC firm, everything changed. Not overnight, but fast enough to feel like I was sprinting barefoot on gravel. There were strategy calls, financial projections, product roadmaps. I went from solopreneur to CEO in a matter of weeks, and while part of me lit up with adrenaline, another part whispered, "Are you sure you belong here?" Imposter syndrome doesn't vanish with a bank balance. If anything, the stakes make it louder. My calendar transformed into a battlefield. I hired a chief operating officer, Andre, a sharp ex-Google guy with the calm demeanor of a monk and the mind of a chess grandmaster. We made an immediate plan to scale Forge beyond coaching and into full tech. We envisioned an app, a digital clarity experience that distilled my methods into scalable frameworks, voice notes, live workshops, and even a progress tracker. We wanted to blend therapy, coaching, and journaling into one ecosystem. Something human, even if it was digital. Designers were hired. Developers brought in. I interviewed product managers until I could barely remember my own name. But here's what nobody tells you about scaling. It will test your beliefs more than your skills. I wasn't struggling with the tech or the growth, I was struggling with the silence. The kind that creeps in late at night, when the emails stop and the world quiets, and you start wondering whether the thing you're building is actually building you back. I started waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing. Not from fear, but from urgency. There was always more to do. Another call. Another draft. Another challenge. My body started speaking louder than my mind. Migraines. A knot in my back that wouldn't release. I ignored it, powered through, told myself this is the season for the grind. But then one day, I collapsed at a photo shoot. My vision blurred, knees buckled. I woke up with an IV drip in my arm, a doctor saying something about adrenal fatigue and cortisol levels and how I needed to stop acting like I was invincible. Rest isn't weakness, he said. Neither is delegation. That sentence stuck with me. So I stepped back. Not from the business, from the need to carry it alone. I let Andre take the lead on op. Nor built our first leadership offsite. I booked a cabin in the Rockies for 5 days and brought nothing but a pen, a journal, and hiking boot. I didn't write a business plan up there. I wrote about who I didn't want to become, someone so consumed with achievement that she forgot why she started. I came down from the mountain clearer than ever. I returned with new commandments for Forge. We never sell shame. We prioritize depth over scale. We never forget the person on the other side of the screen is a life in motion. That energy? It rippled. We launched the app, Forge Flow, 6 months later to a 10,000 user waitlist. We had built it with intention. UX that felt like breathing. Voices that felt like home. Even our onboarding was personal, using AI to ask emotional, not just practical, questions. Retention? Through the roof. And the reviews? One said, "It feels like therapy, coaching, and a mirror all in one." But here's the twist. Growth didn't just bring praise. It brought attack. A popular podcast host accused me of selling empowerment as a product. A think piece popped up calling Forge Flow capitalist self-care. I was even sent a cease and desist by a legacy coaching company that said our language resembled theirs. It didn't. At first, I spiraled. I wrote long responses, drafted tweets, lost sleep over perception. Then I remembered something my grandmother once said. Let people misunderstand you. It's cheaper than constantly explaining. So I did what I always did. I let the work speak louder than the noise. We expanded into corporate partnerships, integrating Forge modules into leadership training programs. We licensed to universities. We built scholarships for women of color who couldn't afford coaching but deserved clarity just as much as any C-suite exec. Within 18 months of launch, Forge Flow was in 27 countries. Revenue passed $15 million. But the real win? The letters. Hundreds of them. From women, men, teens, retirees. One from a man who used the Reclaim module to leave a toxic marriage and start over. Another from a college dropout who credited the podcast for giving her permission to dream messy. Those letters, they were my fuel. My mirror. My reminder. I wasn't just building a company. I was building a movement of reclamation. And somewhere along the climb, I stopped thinking about proving anything, not to my ex, not to the world, not even to myself. I had crossed a threshold where my identity was no longer tied to output. I knew who I was. And I liked her. I liked her a hell of a lot. Of course, there were still problems. Investors pushing for more aggressive monetization. A botched translation launch in Germany. A tech bug that took down the platform for 12 hours and nearly sent me into a panic attack. But those things? They didn't shake me anymore. I had become fireproof. Not because I didn't burn, but because I knew I could rebuild from ash. By the end of year 2, Forbes called ForgeFlow one of the most emotionally intelligent startups in tech. Fast Company listed us among the 50 most innovative wellness brands. I was invited to give a TED Talk. Me, the same woman who once Googled how to ask for a raise without crying. Now I stood on red circles and talked about personal agency like it was oxygen. And the best part? The business no longer needed me to run. I had built a team, a culture, a machine that could breathe on its own. That meant I could dream even bigger. We began developing ForgeEDU, an academic arm designed to bring this curriculum to high schools and juvenile centers. The idea was radical. Teach clarity and confidence before kids are taught they don't deserve it. The more I climbed, the more I realized my work wasn't about coaching. It was about creating mirrors. Places, products, people, that reminded others of who they've always been before the world told them otherwise. And that's the kind of empire I wanted. Not one built on ego. One built on awakening. I used to think transformation was a moment, a spotlight, a check, a headline. Now I know better. Transformation isn't loud. It's not a viral quote or a standing ovation. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's what happens when you stop needing applause and instead start trusting your own breath. The year I crossed the billion-dollar valuation, no one threw a party. In fact, I was sitting barefoot on a floor cushion in Morocco, sipping mint tea, helping a group of teenage girls write letters to their future selves. I didn't even notice the email from my CFO until hours later. The subject line just said, "It's official. 1.01B. I blinked, smiled, closed my laptop. I let the news settle in my bones like warm light. And then I returned to the circle of girls. Because that's what transformation taught me. You don't celebrate reaching the mountaintop by yelling. You honor it by helping others climb. A lot had changed by then. ForgeFlow had become a global clarity ecosystem. Over 5 million users, 17 languages, and partnerships with Fortune 100 companies, Ivy League universities, and government programs. We launched ForgeEDU in 26 school districts, including some of the most underfunded schools in America. We didn't teach kids how to code or write resumes. We taught them how to own their story before the world wrote it for them. We even built ForgeWorks, a reintegration platform for formerly incarcerated women, offering coaching, trauma-informed training, and job pathways in under 6 months. Over 4,000 women completed it in our first pilot year. Recidivism dropped by 87%. But here's what no one tells you. Once you reach $1 billion, the noise around you multiplies tenfold. Suddenly, people who never said your name before want to be associated with your brand. They want interviews, deals, quotes, influence. They offer yachts, galas, equity, titles. And I said no a lot. Not because I was ungrateful, but because I had already walked away from a life that didn't feel like mine once before. I wasn't about to repeat that mistake, even in silk and private jet. My team called me the guardian of the flame. Because I protected the soul of Forge like it was sacred. Because it was. I remember once standing backstage at a major summit in Singapore, minutes before going on. A high-profile investor pulled me aside and asked, "How did you know this would work?" I looked him right in the eye. "I didn't," I said. "But I knew I would." That's the thing about self-made anything. It's never about certainty. It's about conviction. The belief that your potential doesn't need permission. That your story doesn't require credentials to be valid. That your voice, your rage, your hope, your hunger, they are enough. I didn't create Forge to become a billionaire. I created it because I once sat across from a man I loved and said I wanted someone better, not realizing what I really meant was someone braver, someone bolder, someone who wouldn't apologize for wanting more out of life. I didn't leave him for someone else. I left him for the woman I hadn't met yet. And now? She's here. She's me. She lives in a glass and stone home on a hillside. But she still keeps her old journals in a drawer by the bed. She still drives the same Honda on quiet days. She still cries when she gets letters from people who say, "You gave me back to myself." Money can fund freedom, but it can't create meaning. Only courage can do that. And mine was earned. In the silence after goodbye. In the chaos of starting over. In the exhaustion of building alone. In the roar of becoming too loud to ignore. Legacy, I've learned, isn't what you leave behind. I am no longer who I had to be to survive. I am who I chose to become to thrive. And if you're listening to this, wondering if your dreams are too reckless, your voice too raw, your vision too strange, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me back when I sat on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment, terrified and broke and strangely alive. Not the billion. Not the brand. The becoming.